Welcome to Fitness Pro Chat by Fit Aerobic. Now, on to the show.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. Today's guest has helped hundreds of runners go from sideline to smashing their personal records without breaking down. If you want to run longer, faster, and pain-free, you will want to take notes on this one. Welcome to the show, John.
Thank you very much, Alok, for having me along. Really appreciate the invite. Excited to have a conversation about running related injuries, and hopefully your listeners can gain some value from our talk today.
Absolutely, John. So why don't you tell us more about your running journey and how you became a running injury specialist and a physio and a run coach?
Okay, so my running journey initially started when I was probably around 11 or 12, so in the west of Ireland where I grew up. I had been I think a couple of friends noticed I was maybe quick and stuff when we were out playing in school, and then they asked me to join the local athletics club, and then I really started getting into it. So I would do lots of track and field events in the summer, so 60-meter sprints, 80-meter, 100 meters, and then even doing some forms of relay, 4x100 on the track. And that was my summers and then the winter, then it would be cross country. So, it would be wet, windy, cold, muddy, but, very enjoyable through the winter. And I did that basically when I was probably 11, 12, 13, 14 maybe. And then unfortunately, or maybe not at the time how you could call it, that just got into team sport then. Like everybody in Ireland either plays, Gaelic football or hurling, got into team sport and then kind of got out of the athletics and then really just did team sport for years. So Gaelic football in Ireland and then football that you'd call here where I'm based in London, but soccer we'd call it. And then only really got back into running just a few years ago. I was away skiing with some friends in the French Alps and they asked me if I'd like to do a marathon in Vienna Marathon in a couple of months' time. And then I just thought, as a physio, no, probably not a good idea. But then another one of them said, I'm going to do the half marathon if you'd like to come along and join. I signed up for that half marathon and then just loved the whole process, working towards a goal and becoming fitter, faster, having, a meaning and purpose to work towards it. And then following that, I was like, I want to do my first marathon. So working with people with disabilities as a physiotherapist, I managed to get a charity place for the London Marathon. So that was then a bigger goal to work up towards. Just alongside that then, just started seeing more and more runners in my physiotherapy practice, sought out to go on a physio running camp in Kenya at altitude. So we were at 2,500 meters of altitude, running 100 kilometers a week. And then completely fell in love with running, just how the Kenyans keep it so simple. They love it, they enjoy it, but are very good athletes as well too. So from there, I learned a lot of the running related injury side, the run coaching side. So then as more and more runners started coming into my physiotherapy practice, referring friends, I was getting into it more. And I was seeing more and more people with it. So someone would present with a knee injury and then I would help rehab them, get them back towards their running. And then I naturally started to learn more and apply more from the run coach coursing I'd been on in Kenya and the stuff I learned myself. And then it just naturally then became a run coach. So not just get people back running, but keep people running and also help improve their performance. So yeah, that's how it all kind of came together. So now I treat runners face to face in a practice in central London alongside consultants, strength and conditioning coaches, podiatry. We all work together as a team. But then also I see people, runners online. So not just individualized one-to-one programming, but also their strength and conditioning, their mobility, load management, if we have any injuries, and just have that constant ongoing support. So yeah, all running.
That's an amazing, I would say, a bio that you have built all through starting at the age of 11, which was like for most of the kids, it would be starting their schooling and trying to learn more in their studies. And that's where, I mean, I know that that's the right time when you actually pick up those skills. In fact, my running started somewhere 8 years ago, and that was like almost when I was, say, in my mid-career kind of phase when exactly it started. So much later than you, but I could very much relate to what you exactly are saying, and the kind of fun and the addiction that running brings altogether in as such as a say as a sport as well as something which actually helps an individual to express themselves more and be themselves actually. So I going back to say the initial days, and that's how, I mean, that the common question that every beginner faces at this point in time whenever they plan to start running is what type of shoe they should typically wear for running, because not every shoe is meant for running as such. There are good sneakers out there. A lot of bigger brands sell those sneakers in the name of running, but not every shoe is designed for runners' feet. It requires a certain understanding so that you minimize the kind of injury, especially in the early when you are starting your running journey. It is important that you minimize your journey so that it does not break in between while at you are starting. So what are your suggestions to a beginner to run pain free and gradually progress from a beginner to becoming a consistent runner, and what type of shoes should they be choosing?
Yeah, absolutely. Really important question. So, if we're going to be putting thousands of steps down through our feet, down through our lower limbs, we want to have that right support. Now, there's basically three categories and a subcategory of running shoes. So if we just lay them all out initially, so we've got our daily trainer, our tempo speed shoe, our race shoe, and then if we do some trail running, then that would be our trail running. So if we're looking at starting out, and this kind of comes into how we reduce the likelihood of running related injuries, is that we want to do easy effort running only. So not actually going to a pace, because a pace is a number on our watch. It doesn't know how hard we're pushing. It doesn't know how we've slept. Are we stressed? Is it dehydrated? So we want to be doing all easy effort running. So anytime that we're pushing hard or working hard, it's no longer easy. So that would be one of the biggest things. We'll come on to that a bit later. But so our daily trainer shoe is a shoe that has lots of cushion and support in it. And, to give an example of a few of them could be like your Adidas Evo SL is a pair that I have, really cushioned and bouncy. And that's what I do most of my mileage in, because if I'm going to be doing lots of mileage in it, I want it to have lots of cushion and support. It's an easy run, so my pace doesn't matter. So I don't need a faster shoe, but then also a faster shoe will have less cushion and support in it. So our daily trainer will be initially, so Adidas Evo SL is a good one, Asics Nova Blast, New Balance Fresh Foam, and then Nike Pegasus. And now there's no one particular brand or type of shoe that's the best, because there's a reason why, the elite runners and different runners out there are using different brands. If there was one best one, they would just use that.
Absolutely.
So it's really just about, once you've got a reputable brand, it is personal preference about what works for you and what's comfortable. So for me, I quite like the Adidas Evo SL. They've been a really popular shoe this year, but as long as you're within that bracket of daily trainer, you're using it for your easy run shoes, and that it's comfortable for you is the key thing. So that would be the starting running out. And then there's different shoes then for your tempo and speed that are a little bit less cushioned. And then if we do then graduate on then to a race shoe, we can have carbon in the race shoe. So basically the carbon works as like storing and releasing energy. So it's less cushioned and supportive, but it can make us go faster. But we only really get the benefits of that speed when we are going faster. So I wouldn't even really worry about having a shoe for each one when starting off. However, when you start to introduce, if you do any speed, tempo or speed, or any race shoe, it can actually be good to have a rotation, because what you're doing with the rotation is that, so you're encouraging your legs and your lower limbs to have to tolerate and take on load in slightly different positions and different angles, which can just help with keeping us running too. We're not using the same shoe, exposing our lower limbs to the load in the same way.
Absolutely. I would say that that's brilliantly put together, especially choosing the right kind of shoes and rotating these shoes so that the feet get accustomed to running on the tar. And another question that typically crosses every beginner's mind is choosing between pace or long distance running, and that's where you talked about it as well.
Yeah.
So it would be good to understand what's the best strategy for a beginner to follow. Should they run long distance, focus on running long distances initially, or should they focus on running shorter distance and build on their space?
Yes, very good question. So, and I don't necessarily think it needs to be kind of one or the other. I think that we definitely don't want to be working on speed. What we want to do is basically the more easy mileage that we can tolerate, the better. So, if we can keep the effort easy, if we can build up the time on our feet, and what we're doing then is we're exposing our lower limbs, our body to less load than that high intensity work. But then also from like a run coaching point of view, if we look across all events, 5K, 10K, half marathon, the most important form of fitness is your aerobic fitness. So if we think of our aerobic fitness like a pyramid, so we've got zone 1, zone 2, zone 3, zone 4, zone 5. If we focus on our speed work, higher load, higher intensity, when our body's not used to that load, but then also we're just building our pyramid up narrow, and then we're not able to take on that time on feet because we're fatigued. But then when we're doing our easier running, we're spending more time in that zone 1, zone 2, so we're expanding our aerobic base. But what's important to note is that if we're just starting out running, we don't have a big aerobic base. And what happens is that often people think the harder I work, the harder I push, the more progress I'll get. But what happens is that their heart rate is zone 2, and then they go into zone 3, and then they go into zone 4. So what's supposed to be an easy run is more of like a tempo run and then a threshold run.
Yeah.
So that's why it's really important. If you're on a run starting out, it's completely fine to stop, to walk, to catch your breath. The best runners in the world will do interval training. Jakob Ingebrigtsen, one of the best runners, he will walk a hill on an easy run. He could sprint that hill if he wanted, but he walks it because it's an easy run. And if he starts to run that hill, it no longer becomes easy. So then the run loses its purpose. So that's really important when we're programming. If we're on an easy run, it stays easy. And then if we're on, say, a threshold or a tempo run, we're hitting certain heart rate zones because we want to be you need to be in a heart rate zone to expand that zone. So easy running initially for sure, and building up your time on feet. And I would just gradually start to add in some speed. And even before speed, I would look at introducing strides. So strides where we're going kind of 70-80% of our max speed, really driving arms, working on our form efficiency. It's a nice way of getting in a little bit of a higher intensity, but it's not a full-on speed session that might be just a lot when you're starting out.
That's a great piece of information, because that's the primary question. And even when I was starting running, that was the primary question. And that's how the running community around me actually helped to get out of that and build on my distance fast, get as many steps as possible before I actually could start thinking about running at a faster pace. So I think that that's brilliantly put together. And coming from you, I think it validates lot of misconceptions that's out there, especially for young runners. One of the other, interesting piece of trivia that I want to mention is, since we were talking about aerobic and anaerobic, so if you look at Fit Aerobic's name, so the word aerobic and anaerobic has been amalgamated into fitness here to make it Fit Aerobic. So that's how it actually originated.
Brilliant.
a few years ago. So picking up from that, and since we were also talking about consistency, and we talked about increasing the number of steps, so consistency plays a bigger role in adding more number of steps. So what best strategy would you suggest to build on that consistency? Because most cases it happens like a beginner starts running for some time, a month or two, and then get some injury, and then they go off track, and then they never return.
Yeah.
So that how exactly you would, or what's the best strategy for them to pick up the consistency that's required?
What's really important for consistency, and this comes into everything in life, I believe, is that trying to find what you like and what you enjoy and to make it as enjoyable as possible. So as a physiotherapist, when people ask me what's the best exercise and activity, for me, I will say, well, what do you like? What do you enjoy? Because, if you can make it enjoyable where, you find a group and you meet friends in the group and you run together and you network and you go for a coffee afterwards, and then you look forward to that, you want to do that. There's the accountability element of this is kind of booked in, this is what I'm looking forward to. But also I'm a big believer in just finding a system. So just actually being honest, where maybe just starting out at even twice a week. So once is difficult to make progress, twice basic maths, double the amount. Can we start off with twice a week and, with easy running? And ultimately, if you're able to keep the effort easy, well, number one, every run, if I did every run, I run 8-9 times a week. If I did every run hard, I wouldn't enjoy it, because every run would be really difficult. But because I do 2-3 hard sessions, that's kind of a third of my running. So I almost kind of look forward to them and I'm fresher for them. So if you can keep them easy, keep the pace easy, do it in a group, and then you gradually just start to get faster and enjoy it as time goes on. So, and then just trying to make it as smooth as possible. So not overanalyze the data. If you've got a certain pace set out and you're not hitting that, then just dial it back and just do what you can. Ultimately, if you can just get out the door, do it consistently, then you'll enjoy it more and you'll become better. So try not to overcomplicate it too much.
That's so the best I can get from coming from you, actually. And because yes, it's important to spread out, it's important to add more number of steps as someone actually starts running. And in order to build consistency, it's important to take care of injuries as well. And other thing which I personally related to is like once we become consistent, the aspect that kicks in, especially, and you talked about it earlier as well, is something called runner's addiction. And you get that kind of kick. If you don't go out on the roads or if you don't go out on the field running, you feel that something is missing from your life. So you get that can get addicted to running almost on a daily basis. Where and that's where say sometimes say injury or health issues kicks in, and many cases even professional runners or even someone who's been running for long, they tend to ignore these health issues and injuries, and they just keep pushing because that kick is always there, that yes, I can challenge myself every day and I can achieve what I want as my personal best. So how do you help runners make the smart recovery decision so that they don't get into this guilt of stopping for some time or getting into a recovery phase for some time before they actually come back and start running again?
Yes. So what's important initially is to have an understanding of why the runner runs and why it's important to them. Often people will run for stress, for mental health, for anxiety. They will, they'll have that social aspect where maybe they go and meet friends and that's important to them. So it's important to have an understanding of why people run before you just tell them to stop, because it can be a big part of people's lives. And,
yes.
Initially what I want to do is screen if we have a stress fracture. It's great, running is becoming so popular and everything, but because of that, I'm seeing more and more people presenting with stress fractures, and that's with what we'll touch on maybe a bit later, how they can happen. I want to determine if I can keep the runner running, even if it's just a little bit, and I'll be looking at dialing intensity down, mileage down, implementing individual rehab alongside. But then if we can't run, then what other forms of cross training can we do? So I really like the exercise bike for runners, particularly when they're injured, because remember what I said about that zone 1, zone 2? It's easier to stay in that zone 1, zone 2. It works on aerobic fitness. It doesn't have that load and impact going down through your lower limbs. And then you're actually fresher for your next run if you even do it alongside your running. So, we can help with that psychological aspect side of things on the bike. We can work on that aerobic fitness. And then, we're not most likely, depending on the injury, irritating things and making things worse. Once I've ruled out, say, a stress fracture, which we do actually need an MRI that I would work on with our consultants, and they may refer for bloods to see if there's any deficiencies in vitamin D, iron, calcium, and so on. Then I tried to keep runners running, even if it's just doing a little bit, because once we stop, the next thing is, when do we start back up? And actually, sometimes what happens, and is very frustrating for runners, is that they maybe rest for a month, and there's 2 phases of rehabilitation. So they maybe let things calm down, but they haven't built things back up. And then what can sometimes happen is that, so the level of capacity that the tissues tolerate, so they're no longer exceeding that from the running, so they're not getting their symptoms, but then that level of capacity has gone lower. So then they return to running and it comes on even quicker. So we want to try and maintain that capacity and maintain those elements that they're getting from a mental health aspect. And then we're trying to rehab then alongside. So my approach as a physiotherapist and a run coach is that I can do basically the individualized rehab, our strength and conditioning, but then also the load management, all while having an understanding of the running training as well too. So that's where it all really comes together.
And just picking up from that, so there are 2 aspects that actually typically many runners talk about, and one of them is their personal best, and the other is VO2 max. Right. And I mean, I learned that you have a personal best of 2 hour 55 minutes to do a marathon. That's like sub 3 marathon is an amazing kind of personal best that every runner who actually vie for, and then that's like a pride that every runner carries in their as a validation of this process. So how do you relate to these runners' mindset? And since you talked about individualized personal rehab, which involves, say, mental conditioning, nutritional conditioning, and fitness and physical conditioning. So how do you amalgamate all of these factors together and help runners achieve their personal best? Because ultimately, the aim of every runner is to get their PBs in every race, which incidentally isn't possible. But if at all it has to be attempted, what's the strategy around it without, say, crashing out or burning out in this process?
Yeah, so really good question. And, these things are multifactorial in regards to that there may be several things contributing. And then when I'm doing my assessment, I'm basically formulating what percentage is contributing towards each factor and what would be the most important factor to address. So I think that this is what I used to do myself, which I do less of now. Hence why I'm racing every week now. I've raced every week.
Okay.
Yeah. Whereas before I used to race less frequently, but I tried to PB every single time. I used to put pressure on myself to try and PB every time, and, get more nervous and then be a bit disappointed if I didn't PB. And now what I do is I just take those factors into consideration. If I've had, I'm not tapering every single week for these races, so I can't expect to PB every single race. So that's one factor. Yeah. But also, it's not something that I've been specifically training for, and they're not A races. So for me, I'm doing 2 races this year that are my main focus. So Copenhagen Marathon. So that's what I did, 2:55. Just really went really well in a negative split. Couldn't have been happier. But then also Valencia Marathon in December. So Now I'm racing every week because I enjoy the social aspect. I meet with friends. I like encouraging other runners. I'm getting a hard effort in a race environment, and then I'm building my confidence. So I would have a look about asking, okay, what races do you have? Or maybe what races could we get in? And then actually seeing, what's the A race? What's the main race that we're targeting? What's a B race? And then maybe what's just a race that, maybe we just do where we've got little blocks at marathon pace or at threshold. So I definitely, I don't think it's good to try and PB every single race because, we decide to do this, we should enjoy this, but then actually picking your races where you do really.
And I think that's what and I've seen in many cases someone knocks a PB and then they immediately go ahead and register for another 10 races each week, and it's like each of them is so much in succession that the chances of crashing out increases typically. I'd say I'm pretty sure the kind of strategy that you suggested would help a lot of runners, especially beginners, to adopt something which is better.
Completely. And the intensity is high in a race, if you are pushing hard.
Yes.
But I'm racing weekly, but then I built up to, 122 kilometers a week, 8 to 9 runs a week on average since October, and, averaged 104 kilometers over 6 weeks. So, my strength and conditioning alongside twice a week with plyometrics. So I'm happy to go out and race and push myself, not incredibly hard, because I do want to run then after that. But I think definitely the first 6 months, I would just look at getting yourself running, keeping yourself running, enjoying it. And then even with races, just like a lot of people can be disappointed with a race when they don't PB, but actually look back on the 3 months before and say, should my training align up to a certain time? I think a lot of people just pick a round figure. I want to go sub 25 or I want to go sub 20, but your body knows nothing about a time on your watch. It just knows an effort. And this is what I've gotten a lot better at as well myself, is that not trying to force a pace on my watch, speeding up, slowing down, just getting into a nice flow, a nice rhythm, and then just trying to get the best out of myself on the day. Wow. Because it could be warm, your fueling could be off, it could be windy, you might not have, you've had a stressful week. So, and then if you just be disappointed, I haven't hit this time, but if you just give what you can on the day, I think it's a healthier relationship with running, and it's a good way to do it long term.
That's really true. And since you already have trained, say, a lot of runners, probably in hundreds of thousands, what are the 3 mistakes that you have come across for most runners that they keep on repeating every time?
Yeah. So it's a lot of the common things, and the 3 things would be: number 1 would be too much, too soon, too fast. And then the last one would be, and we could maybe tie these together, but not doing strength and conditioning and not sleeping sufficiently. So number 1, basically, if we just spike our load, our body's not used to it, and then it can break down. Too fast, remember what I said about if we want to keep easy runs easy, we've less impact, we're in that zone 2. If we go too fast, if we, try and push, or I even see someone goes running past them faster and they try and catch up and keep with them, they could be on a completely different journey or schedule. And then not doing strength and conditioning. So, we actually break our body down when we're doing our long runs. And this is when the sleep and strength and conditioning come in. So when we're resting and we're sleeping, that's when we actually absorb the load and effects of our training. But then also, if we can do our strength and conditioning alongside, it can help keep us running. But then also it can improve our running economy and efficiency. So, when people are cramping at the end of races and their body getting heavy and fatigued. But then also you'll recover better as well too. So, if you're doing your harder sessions or your faster sessions, if your legs are stronger and more robust, you'll be able to get out and do more of your easy running and do more of your mileage. So that would be the 3 things I would say. Also, sometimes what can happen is just a change in environment. So, I had a lady that was said, unfortunately, she had to pull out of Berlin Marathon with a stress fracture, but thankfully I could refer her straight on for her to get imaging with the consultant. I said, was there anything different? She said, no, I done the exact same runs, the exact same day, the exact same shoes. And then I said, where were you? She was like, oh, well, I was away in France. And then she said, it was quite hilly, so there was a change in terrain. So often there can be a training error. So, where too much too soon, too fast, but there might be a change in terrain. Or, if you've been sick and your immune system is lower, you're going to absorb that load not as well. Or if you've been particularly stressed, we're more likely to get pain. If we haven't slept as well, we're more likely to get pain. So it's important to get good at, controlling your energy and not just trying to, just keep pushing and keep pushing.
That's I would say very well put together on how exactly you can push yourself by building a holistic plan around on the running program altogether. And one of the strategies which I have come across is everyone talks about fueling. And it's considered as a and then that's a terminology that's used by most runners instead of nutrition. So what's your thought around it? There are electrolytes, gels, salt tablets, coffee, and many other nutrition, say, guidance available specifically for runners. So what strategy you would suggest or you suggest typically to your, say, when you're coaching someone so that they can become better runners?
Yeah. So what's really important is before, even touching on what type of nutrition is the importance of nutrition. So when I said about, basically say we're on a long run, we're breaking our body down. Like before we even go on that long run, we want to have a full tank of fuel. So if you were going on a journey and you were driving you wanted to drive for a few hours, but you've got a quarter tank before you even start, So you want to make sure that you're fueling your runs sufficiently. So, it can be really good leading up to a marathon to actually just practice with your runs, because this is probably the biggest piece of advice people get from marathons is, nothing new on race day, and don't go out too fast. And people always go out too fast. But if you can actually, even on a Saturday where you're practicing, where you're getting on forms of carbohydrates, now that's what you need to practice. So for me, I quite like rice. It's lighter. Some people prefer pasta, that's heavier, but you're actually fueling well on the Saturday, and then the morning on your Sunday, like practicing what you may do on race day. So, getting good forms of carbohydrates in, electrolytes also, and just fueling well. So for me, what I did with Copenhagen Marathon, and I had practiced this on all my long runs. There was even runs where I was taking on, 40 grams of carbohydrates every 3 kilometers. So I was taking on even more than I needed for 2 reasons. So I could train my gut to get used to it and know I could tolerate it. But then also psychologically that I could go in after months and months of training and know my body is going to tolerate a gel every 5K because I had done it on 3K. So for me, I just all kind of acted it out, what was going to happen psychologically the morning of the race day and getting there and the warm up and everything. Because I had done that basically every weekend. So then when it comes around to race day, you just go and do it. But then you do it when you're tapered and you're fresh and maybe your family and friends are there and, you're not by yourself training. So, again, it is a bit of personal preference. I try not to influence my biases too much on the way you should do it, because some people like some solids, some people like gels, some people like a mix between the two.
Yes.
What I did for my marathon was about 20 minutes before the race, I had a Science and Sport Beta Fuel gel, so with 40 grams of carbohydrates. Wow. And then on my Garmin, I would have basically an EAT notification would come up every 5K. However, I don't actually advise to always specifically take your gel at a distance, because you don't know how you'll feel at 5K. Again, that's just like a time on your watch. So if you feel like you need a gel or you want a gel, take a gel. Like, don't hold yourself back from having it or taking it. and maybe just have an extra one on you. And I like to actually, so take my gel, just have a little bit of it, run with it for a bit, take another little bit, not just take it all down at once. So every 5K, 40 grams of carbohydrates. And then at about 3K, I would actually take a caffeine gel with 200 milligrams of caffeine. There's good research and evidence behind caffeine.
Yeah.
There's reason why there's coffee shops everywhere and long queues for coffee shops. Caffeine can lower the rate of perceived exertion.
Yes.
And actually help with performance. But it's just one of these things, you want to have practice with it. So I would have caffeine before the race, a couple of 100 milligrams around 45 minutes to an hour before. And then again at 30K, because think about it, it can take some time to settle in, and then you want it really hitting when you're coming towards the end of the race. So that would be marathon fueling. But for a half marathon, it's less important, and it depends on how fast you're actually running. But you don't need to say really, really carb load beforehand like a marathon, where with a marathon, I with my clients, 8 to 10 grams of carbohydrates per kilo of body weight. Whereas with a half marathon, again, you don't want to like stuff yourself too much with food that you're feeling heavy and bloated. You want to do what you've done. But I would maybe take just like 1 or 2 gels during a half marathon. But yeah, definitely not as important, because your glycogen stores, evidence suggests, shouldn't really start to kind of deplete until after about 90 minutes. So, but again, it depends. If you're out there for 2.5, 3 hours, then fueling becomes a little bit more important. Yeah, your gels, your solids, but then also just making sure that you're getting electrolytes on, but then really making sure that you're definitely not in a calorie surplus. When you're training for a marathon, it's not the time to try and lose weight, because you're already burning thousands of calories, and you want to take those calories on back on to help with your energy, your recovery, but also reduce your likelihood of injury.
So another important aspect that actually gets ignored is about cool down. And that's like I would say the last on the priority list for most runners. So what's your strategy, and how would you recommend runners to adopt cool down as a kind of recovery in their running journey?
Yes, so cool down can play a role for sure in recovery. And I would say cool down is mostly important for if we actually have done, say, a faster session. Because, when I'm coaching and doing physiotherapy, I try not to give too many things where there's kind of 30 things that we have to think of and do and remember and everything. So back to what we said about consistency, getting out the door, doing it consistently, that's key. But, once we are training consistently and we're enjoying it, then absolutely, we can look at adding in other bits as well. So when we're doing, say, some faster running, this is where warm-up is important as well. We're in our zone 1, we're in our zone 2, we're gradually elevating our heart rate, and then we're actually into our zone 3 and our zone 4. So then on the other side of the scale, we've done our zone 3, maybe our zone 4, and then what we want to do is actually gradually bring our heart rate down. So that's when our cool down comes in. So generally I would advise, maybe 10 to 15 minutes of a cool down, and you really want that effort to be easy. So even more so, we need to be mindful of when you're actually starting out, because you've just done the run, you can be more fatigued. So you really just want to take it nice and easy. We can do our easy pace for 10 to 15 minutes. Some stretching where we're trying to hold for, between 20 to 30 seconds. So ideally just a few stretches that are quite convenient to carry out. So we're looking hamstrings, glutes, quads, calves. So, 3 or 4 that we just do in a little circuit. But you don't really want to be spending more than kind of 15, 20 minutes cooling down, because what's important then is to actually refuel, is to get some calories in, to get some, protein in if it's been a harder session for muscle repair and recovery, overall calories and carbohydrates in if it's been for a long run. Again, just having a system where it's around the same time, the same stretches, and then that you're actually not spending too long out there. Because if you try and say every single time I run, I'm going to spend a half an hour cooling down, you add the warm up onto that, you add the run, you're busy, you've things to do, that can just be barriers to that consistency. So we want to just keep things nice and simple. So that's what I would say for cool down.
Absolutely. So that brings me to my last question of today's session. And there would be like, what is your top 3 recommendations to anyone who's starting their running journey?
Yeah, so really good question to finish up on. I would do completely all easy running for at least 6 months. So I know that it can be, they can be tempting to do these track sessions, and sometimes plans and programs and apps have certain 400 meters and 800 meters. But, we want to build that base, gradually build our body up, exposing it to the load, building that aerobic fitness. So I would just look at easy running. Then I would look at not pushing hard with that effort and not running consecutive days. So, just having a look at, can it be 2, maybe 3 times a week, when works best in your schedule, keeping it nice and easy. And then I would potentially look at maybe a group. So like with that group, of course, if we're starting out, can it be like an easier pace? But then if it's not, that can be a goal to work towards and aim. So keeping the easy runs easy, not doing too much too soon, and then also actually looking at the other factors of non-consecutive days and, getting sufficient sleep. But don't overcomplicate it too much. Just try and get out the door, try and enjoy it. And then eventually, you can look at the other factors then with like threshold and, strides and drills and all these other things that I use with athletes to help improve things. But it's important to be running consistently before we look into them.
Thank you so much, John. I really had a great time discussing with you today's how exactly a beginner runner or even professionals can get or get a lot of insights from our discussions today. Thanks so much for your time, and I look forward to hosting you once again for another insightful episode of Fitness Pro Chat with Fit Aerobic.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. And, I've really enjoyed it. I think you're doing great stuff for the running community. So yeah, really admired what you're doing. And, if anyone did want to find me, they could find me on Instagram, John Physio LDN, or on LinkedIn. And I practicing face-to-face in clinic, but then also online where, there's constant ongoing support over and back where we can modify things, change things around. We can fit rehab alongside and really just building kind of overall fitness and long-term gains. So thanks very much for having me along. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks, John.